So you're thinking about outsourcing your social media, but you don't know what it's going to cost you. You need to work through a budget, but where do you start? When it comes to pricing your social media, there's a number of different components you need to take into account that will work into your overall budget. To begin with, you need to consider the type of provider that you're going to use. Generally speaking, there's 3 different types. There's the outsourced overseas provider, where all your work is sent overseas. There's the specialist social media agency, like us, where you have teams of experts working locally only on social media. And then there's marketing and advertising agencies. Obviously, there's teams of very smart people doing many different things, of which social media is one. You get different pricing from all 3, as you can imagine, and different qualities of service from all 3. Once you've chosen the provider that you'd like to use, the next step is to determine the platforms that you're going to be on and the platforms that you need managed. Generally speaking, you've got the usual suspects, the Facebooks, the Instagrams, the LinkedIns. Often people will also do things like Pinterest, Snapchat, Twitter, YouTube. Depending on your needs, you'll need any combination of those platforms. You then need to determine how many posts you need per week on each of those platforms. Once you've got that worked out, there's a really big important point to consider. Where is your content going to come from? Content origination takes a lot of time. If you have banks of content already available that an agency can draw upon, that's obviously going to save you some money because there's not going to need to be any new content created. Once you've outlined your platforms to be managed, you then need to consider your advertising. Social media advertising, we all will have seen those ads before. Think things like Facebook sponsored posts, Facebook boosted posts, Instagram ads, Facebook Messenger ads. All of those different ads go into creating your social media presence. You need to allocate some budget towards your social media advertising to enhance your presence, to grow your following, and to get more people seeing your stuff. The advertising budgets you can be working with can be as little as $10 or $15 a day, or can be up to $10,000 or $20,000 per month, depending on your budget obviously, but also what your objectives are. If your objectives aren't necessarily huge, you don't need a lot of money to achieve it. An important point to note, often the advertising budget is sort of hidden within your management fee when you're working with an agency. Make sure you separate that out because it's important to have control over each. Your advertising budget does very different things to what your management budget is. You don't want to be locked into the 2 together. Social media strategy. Well, we've all heard that term before, and hey, we've all got a strategy, right? Well, it's not always that simple. Social media strategy isn't always required for every client and every brand. If, of course, you are a big business, some sort of ASX-listed company, you're going to need a strategy that includes things like risk management plans, HR policies, organisational charts, roles and responsibilities, stakeholder management plans. All those things need to be included because it's going to be included in a broader business plan. If, of course, you're not one of those businesses, you don't need everything included. So what you can do is work on a small plan. Maybe something that just includes content streams and fan acquisition strategies, just the basic simple parts that you need to have your presence run. You can be thinking of numbers here that are sort of $2,000 or $3,000 up front to get your strategy developed. If you're looking at something much bigger, it can be up to $50,000 to get a strategy developed. It depends entirely upon the scope of what you need done. In a lot of circumstances, the strategy may actually be included in the management piece. And that is important because, let's face it, if you've got a person doing the management for you, they really should be working out the strategy as they go along. We do. So in that circumstance, you don't really need to pay for the strategy bit. It sort of happens as the management occurs. And the reality is with social media, things move so fast. Often you don't need to invest in a big strategy up front. It comes out of the management as you run your presence. One of my personal favorites here, social media influencers. People think it's the panacea for everything. I'm not so optimistic, let's say. Social media influencers can be a very expensive exercise with a low ROI, or they can be a very cheap exercise with a very high ROI. There's a big spectrum in between. What you need to consider with influencers is you don't always get what you pay for. Sometimes you can be offering things for free. Maybe it's free services or free product for an influencer to try out. That won't cost you very much at all, and you might get a bit of a spark out of it, and that's great, but you've got to do a lot of those for that to be worthwhile. By contrast, you can be paying an influencer big dollars to be doing things for you month in and month out. That might work as well, but you've got to keep a tight check on that to make sure the value comes out. Another thing to consider with influencers is that budget is often transferable or interchangeable with your advertising budget because the two have very similar objectives. The reality is you're looking for reach and both of them will give it to you. It's just a question of where you choose to put your money. If you're an organisation that wants to do all of this yourself, you might want some training. Now, training can come in any sort of format. Generally speaking, people will do things with online courses. Other times they'll be doing perhaps in-classroom training, or they might even be going on a 3 or 4 day course somewhere. The pricing for this can vary greatly. The kind of numbers you need to be thinking about is small hundreds of dollars for online training, right the way through to $10,000, $15,000 for bespoke classroom training that would be happening on site for your organisation for maybe 10 or 15 people. The last point here is the audit. Now, the audit is a really important point to consider because a lot of people just forget about it. A decent social media audit will allow you to plan all of this with precision, knowing exactly what you need before you launch into it. A proper social media audit will involve a social media professional going through all of your existing content and publications, seeing what has worked and what hasn't, defining perhaps some recommendations and observations for what they would change, but here's the more important part. A decent social media audit will look at the metrics behind the content that you have available currently. This means we'll be looking at Facebook Insights, we'll be looking at Twitter Analytics, LinkedIn Analytics, Instagram Analytics, finding out what has worked and what hasn't in the form of numbers. It's quantifiable. Those numbers can then be used to create a quantifiable ROI-driven plan. That plan you can then put money against. The audit generally includes the budget required to do these things, but when you're doing it based on metrics, the budget that's associated has a tangible ROI every single time. A decent social media audit will start at something like $1,500, maybe go up to about $5,000, but the investment can be well worthwhile because it will plan everything else out for you before you even invest or make any decisions. I know this has been a very brief overview. We've got a whole lot more detail on our website. Click the link below or visit our website and look for the article. We go through each of these sections in finite detail. There'll also be a YouTube video series where we'll delve into each of these steps and explain what goes where and what you get for each of these steps. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer anything that you might have. Please leave any questions in the comments section or shoot us an email. We'll answer any questions that you might have, or even any curly ones if you happen to have any for me. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Daniel Martin, CEO of Aston Social, and I hope to see you online soon.